Thank you very much for coming today, Wilbur.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, when your friend Donald Trump called you and said, "I'm thinking of running for president," what did you tell him?
Oh, was my first reaction.
You tell him you didn't think a businessman from New York could get elected?
No, I told him I thought that he would do a terrific job if he could get it. Question was, could we make all the pieces fall into place?
And he said he could, and so you supported him in the campaign?
Yes.
And how did you first meet him?
Well, under rather adverse circumstances, back in the Taj Mahal bankruptcy, Carl Icahn and I were quite involved in the bondholder side. And when you meet someone under those circumstances, you really get to know what they're made of. And if you notice, both Carl and I came out of it sufficiently impressed that we've been his very active supporters since.
Okay, so you met him then where you were basically trying to take the Taj Mahal away from him, or?
Well, that was the initial reaction that we all had. But as I got to understand him, got to understand the magnetism of the name, and got to understand more about what really happened, both Carl and I concluded Taj Mahal was worth a lot more with Donald Trump, the man, and the Trump name than it would have been without either of the two.
Okay, so on election day, many people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, or at least some people on the Hillary Clinton side thought that she was going to win. You were with Donald Trump that day. Did you have any doubt that he was going to win that day?
Not really, because in the last few rallies of the campaign, like Minnesota the night before the election, 13,000 people waited from a rally that was supposed to start at 9 p.m. till 1 a.m., and they were still there, and there was still a line outside. And with that kind of enthusiasm, it was hard to imagine that he would lose.
Okay, so he wins the election, and does he say, "I owe you something, and I'd like you to be secretary of something," or how did that work?
No, well, I answered a helpwanted ad that was posted by the White House, and he read it very diligently, and he thought my 100-word response merited hiring.
Okay, so he offered you the Secretary of Commerce position, but at the time you were already a prominent person in New York. You're running a major investment firm. You have a great life. Why would you want to go to Washington and deal with all the problems there?
Well, I had recently given up wearing horsehair shirts, and I thought some sort of penance would be in line with my long-time career, and I thought going to Washington would suit the bill very well.
Okay, so since you've gone to Washington, have you been disillusioned about anything?
No, actually, I've been heartened. I frankly thought that the quality of people in the government was not as high as it has turned out to be. There are actually quite a lot of very good, very serious, very intelligent, very experienced people wanting to do their best. It's just they've been trapped in a fundamentally dysfunctional system.
So have you found the egos on Wall Street to be bigger or smaller than the egos in Washington?
I think the ones in Washington have slightly sharper knives.
Okay. Okay. So historically, the Secretary of Commerce worried about business issues and promoting the business establishment, which it's appropriate for them to do that. But the president said, "I want you to be my point person really on trade." So was that unusual, and is that something you asked for?
Well, I think the function of Commerce Secretary has varied a lot with the nature of the presidency and the relationship between the president and the secretary. And in my case, he had a very specific idea in mind, in addition to running a department of 47,000 people.
47,000, and you control many different disparate things. You have NOAA, you have the Weather Service, you have lots of things. So
the Census Bureau, the Patent Office, all kinds of things.
And do you get to meet all these people all the time, or?
Well, not so much one at a time.
Right. Okay.
Tuesdays.
So when the president was campaigning, he said, "I'm going to renegotiate NAFTA. I'm going to get out of it, actually, get out of it." Now, he's recently said he would like to renegotiate it. Now, you're the point person on that. So what are you trying to get out of the renegotiation of NAFTA?
Well, the whole idea had always been to renegotiate NAFTA. And that's what we will do. The only reason we haven't done it yet is that there's a complicated process called the Trade Promotional Authority, the so-called fast track. Only the Congress of the United States would regard this process as fast track. We're already 90 days into it. We need now to get a letter accepted by them authorizing the next 90 days, and then we can finally begin negotiating. So that's what fast track amounts to in Washington.
All right, well, let's talk about TPP. The president said he didn't want to go forward with TPP, but are you going to replace what was going to be in TPP with bilateral agreements with various countries?
Yes, we think that there's an inherent couple of problems in multi or plurilateral agreements. The first one is they take forever to do. I think TPP took something like 10 years to get to where the countries could vote on it. Well, when someone spent 10 years of his or her life on one big project, they get so invested in the negotiation that the objective can very easily become get a deal rather than get the deal. So that's one problem. The second problem, let's say you're Japan and I'm negotiating with you, and I say, I'd like you to liberalize your agriculture. And you'll say, that's fine, but you must give me something in return. Then you go to Vietnam and say, I'd like you to liberalize something else. And they'll say, that's fine, but I need something for that. So what's the net effect? Japan now gets what it bargained for plus whatever Vietnam beat out of me, and Vietnam gets whatever it bargained for plus whatever Japan got. Do that over 10 or 12 times, and you got pretty badly beaten up.
Okay. So let's talk about China for a moment. The president in the campaign was fairly negative about China's impact on us in terms of the big trade deficit. Yet he had a meeting. I think you were at the dinner in Mar-a-Lago, and did the president say, "Well, I'm not happy with your trade posture, but if you help me with Kim Jong-un, I might be able to help you a little bit"? And how did that work?
Well, the most bizarre thing about the dinner was obviously that just as dessert was being served, the president explained to Mr. Xi that he had something he wanted to tell him, which was the launching of 59 missiles into Syria. So it was in lieu of after-dinner entertainment that he staged that. And
was that the chocolate cake was supposed to be very good? Did that interrupt the chocolate cake that they were?
Well, the thing was, it didn't cost the president anything to have that entertainment.
Okay. So, right, is it true, though, that you might be easing up on China a little bit if they help a bit on North Korea?
Well, actually, we've been having some constructive discussions with the Chinese on the trade and other economic issues ever since the Mar-a-Lago. I think the big achievement from a trade point of view in Mar-a-Lago was normally people think of trade negotiations being denominated in years. We and the Chinese agreed to a 100-day period during which we would try our very best to make sure that there were some deliverables. Well, 100 days in the world of trade is like a wink and a blink. I think there's a pretty good chance that we will have some very satisfactory deliverables within the 100 days.
Now, our friends north of the border, Canada, they seem to be very friendly people. The president didn't criticize them in the campaign, but now you're imposing tariffs on their lumber. Well, why is that?
No, their behavior violating trade agreements and violating trade practices is what imposed the fine on them. We were just the instrument that delivered the news to them. We had tried very hard to negotiate a reasonable settlement. We didn't get anywhere, and so we imposed the 20% average tariff, which amounts to about $1 billion a year.
And that's going to increase, some people say, home prices in the United States. You think that's true?
Well, home prices in the U.S. have been going up very rapidly anyway because of the public enthusiasm about the Trump administration and because there was an underbuilding of houses for quite a few years. The total cost of softwood lumber as a percent of the average house is a relatively small fraction, and the amount of lumber coming in from Canada is only about 30% of the total. So it isn't like this is going to double the cost of lumber, nor is it going to double the cost of a house.
Okay. Well, what about milk? You're not happy with the Canadians' milk situation? They're producing too much milk? And is that true? Thought you weren't that happy with their milk.
Melon?
Yes.
Well, the melon issue is a new one for me. You see, being new at the job, I haven't heard about all the problems.
Okay. So let me ask you, today, when you deal with members of Congress, do they seem to understand these issues when you explain it to them, or?
Well, they do. It varies geographically. The northern border states, particularly toward the Pacific Northwest, understand it very well because British Columbia abuts them, and British Columbia is the source of about half the softwood lumber coming in and at least more than half of the problem. So those states are very conscious of that. Then there are a few not too conscious. Then you get to Maine, and Maine is very conscious of it.
So on the economy generally, are you reasonably optimistic that we can grow at 2 or 2.5% GDP this year?
Well, I would regard, this year is not a year we're going to have that much impact on because we haven't yet gotten the Obamacare repeal, haven't yet gotten the tax bill, haven't yet gotten all of the regulatory reforms. When we have a first full year that's got all these things in effect, I would be extremely disappointed if we're only 2.5%. Remember, Obama's the first president that didn't have a single year with at least 3% growth in a very long time. So if we can undo the shackles that were put on by regulatory, by energy shackling, fix the trade some, fix the tax code, and get rid of these horrible regulations, there's no reason the economy can't do a lot better than what it's been doing.
So since Donald Trump was elected president and since he assumed the presidency, the stock market's been fairly strong. Do you think the market is a little ahead of the economy?
Well, the stock market's job is to try to anticipate what will happen in the future. As you very well know, job of everybody on Wall Street is to look around the corner and try to guess before the next guy what will be on the other side. So it's natural that the market would anticipate developments in the economy. But I'll tell you, every business executive that I see, even ones who have some very specific complaints about what's going on, every one of them is very encouraged about the new president. And I was with him last Saturday in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and there was a huge auditorium filled with people. I would say there was even more excitement there 100 days after the election than there had been at most of the rallies during the campaign.
So you're a close friend of the president's. Does he like this job? Does he wish he hadn't taken it, or is he happy he has it?
No, he loves the job. There are obviously some obstacles that he has faced. It turns out the Republican Party is quite not as unified as we might have hoped, and it turns out the Democratic Party is more unified against us than we had hoped. So those two things at the extreme have been a little troublesome.
So you've traveled with him. For those who haven't had the privilege of being on Air Force One, what's it like in that plane?
Oh, it's quite amazing. It makes up for having to fly coach the rest of the time.
Okay. So today, your main mission is to renegotiate various trade agreements and also to help bolster the economy. And are you spending a lot of time meeting with business people? The president seems to be meeting with a lot of them. You obviously have your own separate meetings. Is that what you spend a lot of your time doing, meeting with business people to get their sense of what the government should do?
Oh, absolutely. And one good thing about the business community, it's not at all shy about expressing its interests and its desires. But we've also been meeting with the union community because unlike some business people, I have never viewed the unions as being my adversary. I view it as a partnership between labor and management, and they know that, and they've been very cooperative with us.
So do you find, since you've gotten this position, that people laugh at your jokes more than they did before, that people call you from high school and college, always told you they knew you were going to be a big success? Or
Well, the main thing that's changed is there are people whose names and faces I cannot remember who turn out to have been very dear friends.
Oh. Okay. So today, describe a typical day of what you do as Secretary of Commerce. You're in early, you're meeting with your staff, and
Well, I can describe a typical day. Every morning starts out with a security briefing. I have to go to what's called a SCIF, a very restricted area, and all these signing for these top secret documents and all that. Then that lasts for sometimes half hour, sometimes up to an hour. Then we generally have a very brief staff meeting. I'm not big on staff meetings. And then we'll start the series of meetings during the day. Foreign leaders, American leaders, business leaders from other countries. And then every now and again there'll be the phone call summoning me over to the White House. And so then we get with the security and get in the vehicle and go on over. And so I spend a couple hours a day generally at the White House.
and when people come to lobby you or to lobby the president, do they tell you what they think is good for the country or just what's good for their little company?
Well, you'd be amazed how many divergent views there are as to what's good for the country.
Okay. And on tax legislation, do you think it's realistic to have tax legislation this year?
I certainly hope so. And God knows the Congress has debated the issues for enough times. It's really a question, is there the willpower to do it? And if the Republican side can get itself unified, then it will work, even if the Democrats remain as determined as they seem to be to block any kind of progress. I'll give you an example. My own confirmation was really not that controversial. All the Democrats on the committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, voted for me, as did all the Republicans. But they delayed it 2 months, and then when the Senate finally voted, got 72 votes anyway. So what was the big deal? There was no reason to delay it 2 months. What I think maybe was happening is the reason they're slow walking the nominations is they're terribly afraid we might make this work better, and the more they can slow it down, the less danger that it will be a strong factor in the 2018 congressional races.
Was the pleasure of serving in government so great that you wish you had it earlier in your career, or you're happy to do it latter part of your career?
Well, I certainly would have been happy to have been able to afford it earlier in my career. But as it happened, it took me a while. I was kind of a late bloomer.
Oh, by the way, you were a specialist and probably the leading person in buying distressed companies on Wall Street and advising on them earlier. How did you happen to get into the distressed area? It wasn't something you probably thought you were going to do in college or business school.
No, what happened is a very bizarre thing. I went directly from Yale to Harvard Business School, and then directly from there into the Army. In those days, they had universal military training, and I needed the $100 a month that ROTC paid you while you were in school. So I then had to go 18 months in the Army. And while I was there, the man I was scheduled to work for, an early go-go money manager called Imre DeVay, literally the weekend before I reported for work, died. And he sold the firm on his deathbed to Robert Winthrop, very wealthy man from Massachusetts who'd been a client. So I already changed jobs once before I reported for work. And then for a variety of reasons, Mr. Winthrop pretty soon decided that he didn't like being an advisor, he liked better being a client. So he merged the firm with Wood Struthers, and it became Wood Struthers and Winthrop. So by the end of my first month, I had changed jobs twice, and I hadn't even moved my seats. So I thought, this Wall Street is a very dizzying place. And that was the best thing, and it's what got me going in distress, because they had a venture capital fund at DeVay. The Wood Struthers guys didn't want to keep it, so me being the youngest and most expendable person, they said, you get us out of this thing. There are only a couple of ground rules. No litigation, no more capital by us, and if you can do that in 3 years, then you'll get a very nice bonus. Well, so I did it in 2 years, and that was when I first learned how to fight with the banks and with other creditor constituents.
Worked out. So, final question. I see you have very nice Wall Street shoes on, but when you went to the State of the Union address, the press reported that you had slippers on. There were special slippers. Can you describe where they came from and why you wore those?
Yes, I've never been regarded as a fashion plate before. That this is apparently something that comes with high appointed office. What happened was, that was also the day that I was sworn in. And a friend of mine in Palm Beach, who's in the business of making those slippers, made them up specially with the Department of Commerce logo. And I figured I'm going to be standing up a lot because we're going to having to do a lot of TV interviews that night. So I thought I'd wear something comfortable. And I didn't realize that some beady-eyed reporter giving undercover new meaning, because it must have been under a table that they saw my shoes. And then the shoes took on kind of a life of their own. So
and now you can buy them on Amazon or eBay or somewhere?
Well, no, I've been thinking about auctioning them off for some charity.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time and for your service to the country.
Thank you, David.